The Icons of Real Estate Podcast. Are you ready to learn the proven money-making secrets from top-producing icon agents? Ready to skyrocket your business? This podcast is for you. Tune in every week with your host, Tomasz Fonseca, and find out how to implement proven strategies to 10 times your business, from $3 million to $30 million in just 12 months. Brought to you by the Masters at Real Estate Marketing, Arter SEO.
Welcome to the Icons of Real Estate podcast. I'm your host, Patty Teal. You're going to really be impressed with today's guest. Todd Sloan is a professional renovator and former real estate agent who is involved in more transactions every month than most people see in a lifetime. Todd brings a unique and useful perspective to the topic of selling investment properties and renovating them for profit. He's the author of Australia's Home Buying Guide, How to Buy a Property Faster and for Less, and host of the Pizza and Property Podcast. I love that name. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you for having me, Patty. It's great to be here.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I hear you just recently retired from being a real estate agent because you are in a position to be able to do that. So congratulations.
Thank you. I'm still not sure if I'm comfortable with the word retire because I'm certainly doing a lot still, but
Sure. We'll
but I
have
guess
to invent another word, don't we?
yeah, but yeah, it sounds good though. It's got a little bit of flair to it. Yeah.
It does, but I know you're still busy. You're not sitting out in the rocking chair, that's for sure. So, yeah, I'd love to start with your story. I know you're in Australia.
Yeah.
How did you get into the business of real estate? What were the twists and turns, and how did you get to the position you're in now?
Yeah. Okay. So for me, I actually started as a diamond driller. Depends on how long we've actually got to talk about it, but I can try and condense this as much as possible. So it was probably around 2006. I was always into the media side of things, and I wanted to produce this TV show. And everyone I went to try and sponsor it just saw a 19-year-old kid with stars in his eyes, and I just thought, I'm going to just make this happen myself. So I tried to find the highest paying job that I could with no skill sets, and I ended up falling into diamond drilling. And long story short with that, I did that for a few years, but I actually had an accident on a drill rig and I couldn't walk properly then for 4 years.
Oh,
And it was quite I refer to them as my professional alcoholic years now, because I, for some reason, didn't want to take pain medication and just numbed the pain with drinking lots. It's not a good part of my life, but I think it's really one of the things that shaped me into who I am now. And because of the downsides, I think it really gave contrast to the ups. But what it did do, though, is it made me rethink and actually kind of forced me into a new career path. And it was actually my dad that said, you love real estate, you love property, why don't you become an agent? And my exact response was, oh, no, like, because, you know, they're all lying sharks and rah, rah, rah. And he's like, well, hold on a second. First of all, no, they're not. And second of all, why don't you just do it the way that you'd be comfortable with? And I went into it with the mindset of let's give this a go for 6 months, see what it's like. And yeah, stayed in it for almost 8 years and absolutely loved it.
well, that's a wonderful story. Now, what did your dad do for a living?
Dad's a sales rep, but he's a sales rep for more like the things that you just don't think of, like import stuff from China, like here in Australia. But he'll import like bed actions. So which is like the thing that actually makes a sofa bed fold out and then sell that to a manufacturer. So very much like a B2B kind of sales.
Very interesting. So that was only 6 years that you worked as an agent. Now, how did you have such great success?
Well, I think it was closer to 8. I think it was like 7 years,
Okay.
8 months, something like that. But I didn't in the beginning. The beginning was really bad. I got the hard word 3 times, which is the sit down in the office. We really like you, Todd, but unless you start selling something, here's the door. And, which again is quite character building. But every time it happened, well, the first 2 times I just scraped by and managed to list and sell something. And then the last time it was like, no, I actually kind of took flight. And that really took me almost 2 years to understand the business, because I think the thing that I didn't get was the listing part. I could sell houses, and it's probably why they kept me around, because they'd give me other people's houses to sell, because the model works a little bit different here in Australia than it does in the States, from what I understand.
Mhm.
But in Australia, it's very much, you can be the best salesperson in the world, but unless you know how to sell yourself and list the property, doesn't mean
Mhm.
anything. You've got
Mhm.
no stock to sell.
Wow.
And once I started wrapping my head around the listing and the selling me side of things,
Mhm.
it really started to click. And I never turned into like a super high volume agent,
Mhm.
because for me, I kind of did the numbers on it and I didn't think it was worth it. So I would normally sell like anywhere between sort of 30, 40, and I think almost 50 one year. So it's a reasonable amount of transactions for an Australian agent, but there's other
Mhm.
agents out there that build teams of like 5 PAs, and
Mhm.
they'll then go out there and sell 200 properties in a year. But yeah, it just wasn't a fit for me, because then that would have taken me away from all of the renovating and building the portfolio and the podcast.
Right, you got a lot going on. So
Yeah.
you had to learn to sell yourself. We'll take it one step at a time. And how did you learn to sell yourself? Because even here, I think most people who are realtors, they make their money by getting the listings. I mean, that's where most of the money seems to come from. Yes, you can have someone that you're representing and help them find a house, and I'm sure you do well there, but having the listing is a big deal because you know it's going to sell.
Yeah. And for me, I think I'm actually putting together this really big survey at the moment, because I'm surveying that, like, the top 100 property investors, and one of the questions in there is, if you could attribute all of your success
Mhm.
in one word, what would it be? Might not have put that sentence together correctly, but I think you know what I'm saying.
I know what you're
Um,
saying.
and for me, it's persistence. It's just
Persistence. Mhm.
I'm not the smartest. I'm not the most skilled. I'm not the absolute best, but I am the most persistent person. And
I love that. Yeah. So no does not mean no. It just means I'll try another way.
exactly. And that's why most people wouldn't have like floundered for 2 years. Most people would probably have just gone, oh, I don't think this real estate stuff's for me. But
Right.
I knew I could make it work. I just needed to have lots of rejection first.
Mhm. So all the while that you were doing that, you were also buying and renovating property. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. Started that. My very first purchase was actually 2007, but that's definitely not like a portfolio purchase.
Mhm.
That was actually really silly. I was buying it to impress a girl that was coming over from Melbourne, and it later worked out I
It's a good
could have just
reason.
rented. Yeah, sure. um, but that was like a classic, like bad investment kind of story. It
Mhm.
went nowhere. But then in 2017, that's when I thought, let's actually start building the portfolio. That's when I really began.
Really interesting. Now, how different or similar are the properties, the market, should I say, in Australia to America? Like we just had this market that ended a few months ago that anything would sell and they were selling with cash. Was that going on in Australia too?
Yeah, 100%. So, and probably timed very similarly. That
Mm-hmm.
I think in Adelaide, things are still going reasonably well. They've absolutely softened from where they were, but they're
Mm-hmm.
still going good. I think Brisbane's still not too bad as well, which, like, Brisbane is probably like the Florida like equivalent where you are.
Okay.
It's nice, it's
Mm-hmm.
warm, it's a really beautiful spot. But Melbourne and Sydney, which would probably be, I don't know, your California, New York kind of equivalents, your really your big anchor cities,
Mm-hmm.
they felt it first, which they always do.
Oh, yes.
They're
Mm-hmm.
normally the biggest ones are the first to really boom and do really well, but they're also the first to go backwards.
I love Sydney. It's such a pretty city. I just really think it's
Beautiful.
gorgeous. Yes. So, where were most of your investments, your renovation homes? Were they all over the country or in a certain area that you focused on?
Yeah, I focused on two different states. So started building in Adelaide and then started building in Queensland. So yeah, I've got a few here in South Australia. But now there's something called land tax in
Mm-hmm.
Australia, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people diversify. I mean, there's a few reasons, but that's one of why it's smart to really diversify between states, because otherwise you can hold this amazing portfolio, but land tax scales up very quick, and yeah, you can lose a lot of the profits to land tax if you don't.
Oh, yeah. And how do the prices compare? Like, how much is a house in Adelaide, an average house?
Yeah. Okay. So average, I think average house price officially is something like $687. Sorry, six hundred eighty-seven
I
thousand.
was going to say,
So
I'm moving tomorrow. Okay.
Mhm. So I'm
And
going to have another sip
Queensland?
of coffee there, Patty. I think
What time is it there, by the way?
it's like 6 a.m. or something.
Oh, cool. You have your coffee. That's very early. You're doing wonderfully. And the average cost of a home in Queensland?
Queensland's a pretty big state, and there's a lot
Okay.
of different
Oh,
cities
I
in
see.
there. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're talking about Brisbane, you're probably talking more around that kind of like 750 sort of
Mm-hmm.
mark now.
Mm-hmm.
Average house price in Sydney, looking more like around that kind of 1.4, 1.5.
Mm-hmm.
Average house price Melbourne, generally around that kind of 1 to 1.1 million mark.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Perth is probably one of the more affordable states. I think average house price there has still got a 5 in front of it. So, but
Wow.
things are changing. Perth didn't grow the same way everywhere else did, but it was also because
Mm-hmm.
Perth, what they did during the lockdowns, I think restricted a little bit of that too.
Yeah. Well, that's also very interesting. And this book that you wrote, when did it come out?
It came out last year, actually. I originally wrote it and I gave it the title "What to Expect When Inspecting," which I thought was quite
Mm-hmm.
catchy.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I
and
like it.
thank you. But then a publisher got a hold of it, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, within about a week, offered me a book deal, and said if you write another couple of chapters and change a few inappropriate jokes about Kim Kardashian, we'll
You'll be good to go.
yeah.
Oh, that's great. So you put so much information into this book, um, from what I've read, and I'd like to ask you some questions. It's so nice of you actually to share your knowledge with others. And the first one I want to ask you is the common pitfalls buyers should watch out for.
Common pitfalls, and I mean this kind of goes across a few different categories, but one of the main ones is have your finance ready. And
Mhm.
again, I don't know the real semantics of how it works in the States, but we see this all the time in Australia. Buyers, especially young buyers, will start looking at all these different properties, get excited, and they'll be like, "Oh yes, I really like this one. This is great." And then they'll put in an offer, and it's like the next sentence out of their mouth is, "Oh, we still need to go to the bank.
Oh,
Don't worry, we'll be
yeah.
fine." And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, you won't, because the other 10 offers that you're competing against, like they've already got their ducks in a row. It's
Right.
going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I see not only for that reason of the competition, but also because sometimes people will think, oh, we've definitely got 500,000 to spend.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like they keep missing out, missing out, missing out. Then they go to the broker and realize actually they could have got 650. And if they had have realized
Oh.
this 3 or 6 months ago, they
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have wasted 3 or 6 months shopping at a price range that was below. And again, the same thing can happen in reverse. Sometimes people shop a little bit too high. What's the saying? Champagne taste, beer pocket prices.
Yeah, something
Like
like that.
either way, it's just
Caviar
about
taste, and I don't remember something like that. Yeah.
yeah, that kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing. So it's just if you know the order, you can really make sure that you actually you make it a more fun experience, not an
Mm-hmm.
experience where I used to see it all the time. People would rock up with that make it stop look on their face. Like it should be. And I think that the other big thing is really knowing what to and what not to say to an agent. And this is
Okay.
what I meant by before, like, because you'd know more about like the rough percentages on this, but from what I understand, not too many Americans actually go it alone on the buying side, do they? You normally have an
No,
agent represent you.
not too often. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't work that way in Australia. So they're called
Ah.
buyer's agents here in
Mm-hmm.
Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very new. Like they've been around for ages, but there was probably like 500 in the country compared
Mm-hmm.
to whatever it is, 50,000 real estate agents. So,
Oh.
but now they're starting to get a few more buyers agents. But the
Mm-hmm.
majority of Australians, and when I say the majority, I really mean like 95% of Australians, probably even
Mm-hmm.
more, will be the ones that actually negotiate direct with the agent, which
Mm.
I've just always looked at and thought is so silly because
Mm-hmm.
you, you're taking on a seasoned professional. It's
Right.
it's like Patty, if you and I got onto the basketball court against LeBron, it's like we're not winning. It doesn't matter
No,
how much
no.
communication.
That's a great way to put it. I love that. Ah, so very interesting. Yes, you do need somebody to be looking out for your interests, especially if that's not your field. I mean, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's great advice. And then you say make sure your finance is approved correctly, and maybe you address that. You know, are you talking about the amount that you would be approved for?
Yeah, the amount, and again, the process might work slightly differently in the States, but I
Mm-hmm.
imagine it'd be pretty similar. Like you've got like a pre-approval where you sit down with either a bank or a broker and go, okay, well, this is what we want to do. And they essentially go, how much do you spend? How much do you earn? This is how much we'll lend you. That's the pre-approval stage. And it's usually when they rubber stamp it for anywhere between like sort of 3 and 6 months. I'm pretty sure it's normally 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And you can run around going, I know I can get 400,000, $1 million, $5 million, whatever
Right.
they've told you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's doing it without that can really work against you.
Yeah. And then how do you make sure you're getting the best deal on your loan? Do you have to shop around? What do you suggest there?
Well, understanding the market and not being afraid to actually do a bit of research, because like I'm fortunate because I genuinely love property. I always said you could pay me triple to sell vacuum cleaners and I just wouldn't do it. Like it wasn't the sales side of things that I loved. It was the real estate side of
Mm-hmm.
things. And I think that it's where it's easy for me to say do research, but even if you don't love it, if you can end up saving 10,000, 50,000, like a substantial amount of money just by actually understanding comparable sales in an area, why
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't you do it? Even if you absolutely hated it. Like I hate administration work, does my head in. It's not my thing. But
Right.
if someone told me, Todd, do some admin work for 5 hours this week and you save 50 grand, I'm all over it. Let's do it for 10
Right.
hours.
Gotcha.
Because I think
Yeah.
it's the simple turn of a phrase sometimes that like I've walked people into paying $20,000 extra with a sentence, but I
Wow.
couldn't have done that if they actually understood that the house down the road had a swimming pool. And you know what, that
Mm-hmm.
one that we're just comparing it to that was cheaper, that was actually on a main road, but they didn't know that, and I knew that.
Mm-hmm.
If
Mm-hmm.
you've got a bit more of that local knowledge with sales, that it will
Right.
take you a little bit, but it can save you a hell of a lot.
Right. And that's why here, and I imagine there too, if you're working with a buyer's agent who knows the ins and outs of a neighborhood, they know it's a very crowded street during certain hours. They just know those things that you wouldn't know if you're new to the area.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of that, you talk about in your book, I know, finding that right area that's going to be right for you. And if you have a family, your family, what are the things that you recommend people look at?
Well, it came about on a conversation many years ago with a good friend of mine. And I think I would have been like 20 at the time. And I was working on some business venture. And he was quite a well-respected businessman at the time, and now very much so. And the advice he gave me was, Todd, there's 3 things everyone wants in business. They want it to be good, they want it to be fast, and they want it to be cheap. He said, there's only 2 of them you ever get. If it's really good
Mhm.
and it's fast, it's not going to be cheap. If it's really cheap and it's good, chances are it's probably
Oh.
going to take a long time.
Mhm.
And it just hit me one day, and I applied the exact same kind of formula to buying real estate. It's beautiful, close, and cheap. When people
Oh.
start going, well, how do we really know what we want, what's really important to us?
Mhm.
You filter this through the little matrix in the book. If it's going to be really beautiful, and beautiful is a little bit about size, it's a little bit about style. It encapsulates the feel of the property.
Mhm.
Generally, let's say you want to live right in the heart of, I don't know Florida too well, but Miami, I'm assuming, is a pretty desirable place to live.
It seems to be. I mean, for me, it would not be my place because it's
No?
so crowded and so big. Maybe not so crowded on the beach, if you know, very expensive, but I like smaller areas. So, but for some people, that would be their thing for sure. A
And
younger
let's,
person too, let's go out and stay out all night, and there's just so much going on.
oh God, I'm too old for that now. I'm happy.
Oh dear.
But let's say someone wanted to really live like as close as possible to the beach in Miami, and they
Mhm.
wanted the party scene. And so you'd
Yeah.
look at that and you'd go, well, and let's say if you only got 500,000, no idea what property costs there, but $500,000 to spend. You can go, okay, well, I can get on the beach, but I'm only going to get this tiny little 1-bedroom or studio apartment, and it needs to be renovated. It's
Mhm.
like, okay, or maybe I want a little bit more beautiful. And then, well, okay, well, you can do that, and it's going to be a little bit bigger, but you're going to have to go a little bit further away. So you
Right.
sacrifice that close for the beautiful
Mhm.
side of things. But
Mhm.
maybe you don't want either of those, and you're like, no, I really want to be on the beach. I really want to make it beautiful. Well, then sacrifice the cheap, bump it up from 500,000 to 6 or to 7 or to whatever it is.
Mhm.
And playing with this, I found really helped. I used it with hundreds of clients before, and just people that I'd walk through that I could see were struggling buying. And it's why it
Mhm.
made it into the book, because it kind of just changes the way that you really look at the purchasing experience, and very much for the better.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And especially as we know, when the market has been so hot these last few years, where sometimes people couldn't get everything that they
Mm.
wanted, what are you willing to let go of? So that's a
Yeah,
good way for them to think about it. Yeah.
yeah.
Another thing that when I was reading about your book, it says that you mentioned what to ask your agent for the competitive edge.
So this one, and again, I'm just very conscious of not cultural difference, but the process difference between
Right.
Australia and
Hmm.
when I say agent, I'm talking about the sales agent.
Okay.
Would that be more so the buying agent in the States when you're asking that
It
question?
could be either one. It actually could be either one.
Could be either one. Okay.
Hmm. Some
So
most agents do both, but some specialize in sellers agents and or buyers agents, and most actually do both.
that would be such a better model. I really wish we had. Uh,
Oh.
so it's more down to the negotiation side of things. It's really about what to say and what not to say. And
Hmm.
I actually find what not to say is often more important than what to say. I
Hmm.
think people look for this little magic bullet that they can come in with like a word sword and swing it around and then everything's good. But often it's what you've said that you shouldn't have that gets used against you. And I generally say if you've got a really sensitive time frame, don't ever say that to an agent, because if you say that to a sales agent, and you used to have it all the time, people would try and really push hard and say, "Oh no, we're going to do this. No, we're not going up at all." But they forgot at the open inspection last week, they told me that they were living in the spare room at their mother-in-law's and they absolutely hated it because she kept knocking on the door every 5 minutes and they needed to get out of there. I'm
Right.
just thinking, I know you're going to pay an extra 10 grand. Like, I know that sounds,
Right. Little mind
but
games. Yes, yes. Hmm.
and that's exactly what negotiating is. Like
Hmm.
I interviewed Chris Voss one day on my podcast, and the way that he pulls apart negotiation is just the man's absolutely phenomenal. But it is very much you get paid for what you say and how you say it as an agent. And a lot of what you say is based off of what a buyer is actually telling you, which is
Hmm.
why I really think it's important to not give away information that can really be used against you. And it's about
Hmm.
kind of that little bit of a middle ground. And like in the book, I compare it to if you were going on a date with someone, you imagine they were stunning. They were
Hmm.
so interesting, so intelligent, funny, everything that you're looking for in a
Hmm.
partner. And you were just over the top enthusiastic. Like, oh my God. Oh, I love it. Oh, can I get you a key to my apartment? When are we going to see each other next? It'd be like, calm down there. Like it's either going to be used against you or it's not going anywhere. Like it's not a good way to do it.
Hmm.
But if you were to just kind of take that middle road of, oh, I really like this, I've had a lot of fun, it'd be great to see each other again soon.
Hmm.
That little middle ground there works really well, because on the opposite, if you try and play it way too cool, like you're not interested, they're probably
Hmm.
just going to be thinking, well, that person wasn't really keen,
Right.
and move on somewhere else. With
Hmm.
a purchase, I find it's very similar. If an agent thinks, because some people try and play it way too cool,
Hmm.
and when you're not privy to the conversation at the dinner table, which American, Australian agents, everyone would know what I'm talking about there, that conversation you have at the dining room table with your vendors, with your clients as a sales
Hmm.
agent,
Hmm.
that's when you really get all of the stories coming out of, oh, here's Jennifer and Robert. They absolutely love the place, blah, 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 blah. But here's Susan. You know what? Susan was pretty aloof. I'm not really sure. Like, she says she likes it, but that could be a bit of a shaky one. Whereas like Jennifer and Robert, blah, 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 blah. It's that middle ground. And that's really
Hmm.
what you always want to go for, because it helps you so much in the buying process to not be taken advantage of.
Mm, really interesting observation. So you've done so very well, and yet you're spending your time educating others. What drives you?
I should know the answer to that.
Well, that's okay. It's kind of a thoughtful, kind of a question because maybe have to think about it a minute.
I think it used to be fear, because I grew up quite poor, and like I remember I don't really tell people this, but I used to play the clarinet. I don't say it because it's pretty it's not like a cool instrument. I wish it was the
Okay.
electric.
I like all instruments, so.
But yeah, I used to play. Apparently, I was quite good. This is when I was like between 8 and 10, I think. And
Mhm.
and mum like had to stop lessons because she couldn't afford it, and it was just me, mum, and my sister, and they were like $3 a week.
Mhm.
And I remember that there was something that always stuck with me. And I think I originally wanted to build wealth and really have options because I was so afraid of being poor again. And I think
Mm.
that was probably the original driver.
Mhm.
Now I think it's almost a bit more of being faced with like mortality through a few other life experiences and personal circumstances that just make me realize that it's bigger than just enjoying me in the moment. It's about actually building something that gets left behind. And
Oh,
there's this,
legacy. That's lovely. Mhm.
yeah, like, and I feel like it's a bit of a throwaway thing these days. I think everyone kind of, and maybe it is just something it's more common, and it's probably something that should be more common, because I think
Mhm.
when you build something that's bigger than you, it serves so many more people and it makes you feel good.
Wow, that's a pretty cool answer. Yeah. And of course, you've been through a lot. You said you had trouble walking for 4 years. Well, that'll kind of make you see things from a different perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Like after that,
Mhm.
when I walked from Adelaide to Melbourne, which I don't know distances in the States of like where that would be equivalent to, but it's about 800 kilometers. So it's a bit of a stroll. And
A bit of a
I
stroll.
still, I really still maintain that I couldn't have done that if it wasn't for what I went through with my back injury, because
Mhm.
the amount of pain I had to deal with constantly, you end up just sort of coming to terms with chronic pain. And it's
Mhm.
like, well, this is just life.
Yeah.
And I think that's where like, anyone could do it. Like you could start walking 100 kilometers right now, Patty. Like it's just, you don't need to be fit. You don't need to train. It's just more, well, it's better to train, absolutely. But it's about what's between your ears. It's when your
Mhm.
mind says stop, your body doesn't actually need to stop. It just
Mhm.
wants to stop because it hurts.
Mhm.
And and I think that, yeah, that really shaped things, knowing that pushing through the pain wasn't comfortable, but was totally possible where I wouldn't have thought it to be before.
That's fascinating. Reminds me, did you ever see the Forrest Gump movie? It's very old, but he's running and running and running across the country, and then one day he just stops. And all these people start following him, thinking he's a guru. It's actually quite cute, but anyway,
I've absolutely seen it. I've
older
loved it.
movie. You should check it out sometime. So your
Yeah.
podcast, Pizza
Yep.
and Property, I love that. And I think it relates to what you were saying that Australians would understand. You sit down and have dinner with people, and that's when you really get a chance to get to know them and find out what they really like, what's important to them. Is that where the name came from?
Kind of. It was actually two different things. So first, the quickest answer, and both of them are the truth, but the quickest is it's my two favorite things. I absolutely love
Okay.
and probably
Okay.
too much. I used to weigh about 79 kilos. Now I weigh like 107 kilos. So I should pull the pizza love back a little bit, really. But but the other side to it is it's about balance.
Mhm.
It's pizza and property basically represent the fun and the finance, because if you just have one, you don't really have a life, in my opinion.
Mhm.
If all you have is just pleasure, like it I forget who said it, but someone was saying that a person's life that's filled with pleasure is usually devoid of meaning. And I think
Oh.
that's really, really true. And I can speak from a little bit of experience from that, from my back injury and just
Mhm.
constantly drinking and just trying to find fun to escape the pain that I was in. And
Mhm.
it was empty. And then on the flip side to that, though, if all you focus on is the finance side, I believe it's a very lonely pursuit. And
Mhm.
it can also be like really void of that meaning and good feeling as well. So pizza and property is about balancing both in life, because I think that's really when you've like made it, quote unquote.
Right.
It's yeah, it's the balance that matters.
And the alliteration is nice too. The P's are very catchy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's that's great. Pizza and property. Who doesn't like both of those things? So it seems to me, even though you pointed out a lot of differences between Australia and the States, it seems to me that there's many more similarities than differences as I listen to you.
Yeah, probably. I still haven't been to the States. I really want to go, but
Oh, you must. Yes. Now that
yeah, I
everybody
think
can travel again, you should take a trip.
well, that's it. And actually, I proposed to my girlfriend was about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and we're
Mhm.
talking about a bit of a honeymoon, and States has
Oh,
come up.
Congratulations. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So if people are listening and they want to know more about your book, know more about you, know more about your podcast, want to take a listen, how would they do all of that?
Yeah, so we're on all the major platforms for the podcast. So if you just type in pizza and property or go to pizzaandproperty.com. And as far as the book, I think easiest way would probably go to Amazon because it's in all the major bookstores here in Australia, but I don't know about that globally. But if you go to
Mhm.
Amazon and type in Australia's
Mhm.
home buying guide, then
Mhm.
yeah, you'll be able to find it.
Amazon has everything, doesn't it?
They really do. Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being our icon and letting me interview you today. It was absolutely a joy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Patty. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Todd. You take care.